The Persian army was now close to the pass, and the Greeks, suddenly doubting their power to resist, held a conference to consider the advisability of retreat. It was proposed by the Peloponnesians generally that the army should fall back upon the Peloponnese and hold the isthmus, but the Phocians and Lokians expressed their indignation at this suggestion. Leonidas gave his vote for staying, where they were sending at the same time an appeal for reinforcements to the various states of the Confederacy, as their numbers were inadequate to cope with the Persians. During the conference, Xerxes sent a man on horseback to ascertain the strength of the Greek force and to observe what the troops were doing. He had heard before he left Thessaly that a small force was concentrated here, led by the Lacedaemonians under Leonidas of the house of Heracles. The Persian rider approached the camp and took a thorough survey of all he could see, which was not, however, the whole Greek army, for the men on the further side of the wall, which after its reconstruction was now guarded, were out of sight. He did nonetheless carefully observe the troops who were stationed on the outside of the wall. At that moment these happened to be the Spartans, and some of them were stripped for exercise, while others were combing their hair. The Persian spy watched them in astonishment. Nevertheless, he made sure of their numbers and everything else he needed to know, as accurately as he could, and then rode quietly off. No one attempted to catch him, nor took the least notice of him. Back in his own camp, he told Xerxes what he had seen. Xerxes was bewildered. The truth, namely that the Spartans were preparing themselves to die, and to deal death with all their strength, was beyond his comprehension, and what they were doing seemed to him merely absurd. Accordingly, he sent for Demaratus, the son of Ariston, who had come with the army, and questioned him about the spy's report, in hope of finding out what the behaviour of the Spartans might mean. Once before, Demaratus said, when we began our march against Greece, you heard me speak of these men. I told you then how I saw this enterprise would turn out, and you laughed at me. I strive for nothing, my lord, more earnestly than to observe the truth in your presence. So hear me once more. These men have come to fight us for possession of the pass, and for the struggle they are preparing. It is the custom of the Spartans to pay careful attention to their hair when they are about to risk their lives. But I assure you that if you can defeat these men, the rest of the Spartans who are still at home, there is no other people in the world who will dare stand firm or lift a hand against you. You have now to deal with the finest kingdom in Greece, and with the bravest men. Xerxes, unable to believe what Demaratus said, asked further how it was possible that so small a force could fight with his army. My lord, Demaratus replied, treat me as a liar if what I have foretold does not take place. But still, Xerxes was unconvinced. For 4 days Xerxes waited in constant expectation that the Greeks would make good their escape. Then, on the 5th, when they still had made no move, and their continued presence seemed mere imprudent and reckless folly, he was seized with rage and sent forward the Medes and the Sicanians with order to take them alive and to bring them into his presence. The Medes took their place, and, in spite of terrible losses, refused to be beaten off. They made it plain enough to anyone, and not least to the king himself, that he had in his army many men indeed, but few soldiers. All day the battle continued. The Medes, after their rough handling, were at length withdrawn, and their place was taken by Hydarnes and his picked Persian troops, the king's immortals, who advanced to the attack in full confidence of bringing the business to a quick and easy end. But once engaged, they were no more successful than the Medes had been. All went as before, the two armies fighting in a confined space, the Persians using shorter spears than the Greeks and having no advantage from their numbers. On the Spartan side, it was a memorable fight. There were men who understood war pitted against their inexperienced enemy, and amongst the feints they employed was to turn their backs in a body and pretend to be retreating in confusion, whereupon their enemy would pursue them with a great clatter and roar, but the Spartans, just as the Persians were on them, would wheel and face them and inflict in the new struggle innumerable casualties. The Spartans had their losses too, but not many. At last, the Persians, finding that their assault upon the pass, whether by division or by any other way they could think of, were all useless, broke off the engagement and withdrew. Xerxes was watching the battle from where he sat, and it is said that in the course of the attacks 3 times, in terror for his army, he leapt to his feet. Next day the fighting began again, but with no better success for the Persians, who renewed their onslaught in the hope that the Greeks, being so few in number, might be badly enough disabled by wounds to prevent further resistance. But the Greeks never slackened. Their troops were ordered in divisions corresponding to the states from which they came, and each division took its turn in the line, except the Phocians, which had been posted to guard the track over the mountains. So when the Persians found that things were no better for them than on the previous day, they once more withdrew. How to deal with the situation Xerxes had no idea. But just then, a man from Malice, Ephialtes, the son of Eurydemus, came in hope of a rich reward, to tell the king about a track which led over the hills to Thermopylae, and thus he was to prove a death of the Greeks who held the pass. Xerxes found Ephialtes' offer most satisfactory. He was delighted with it, and promptly sent off Hydarnes with the troops under his command. They left camp about the time the lamps were lit. This then was the mountain track which the Persians took after crossing the Asopus. They marched throughout the night, with the mountains of Etra on their right hand and those of the Trachis on their left. By early dawn they were at the summit of the ridge, near the spot where the Phocians, as I mentioned before, stood on guard with 1,000 men to watch the track and to protect their country. The Phocians had volunteered for this service to Leonidas, the lower road being held as already described. The ascent of the Persians had been concealed by the oak woods which cover these hills, and it was only when they were up that the Phocians became aware of their approach. For there was no wind, and the marching feet made a loud swishing and rustling in the fallen leaves. Leaping to their feet, the Phocians were in an act of arming themselves when the enemy was upon them. The Persians were surprised at this sight of troops preparing to resist them. They had expected no opposition, yet here was a body of men barring their way. Hydarnes asked Ephialtes who they were, for his first fearful thought was that they might be Spartans. But on learning the truth, he prepared to engage them. The Persian arrows flew thick and fast, and the Phocians, supposing themselves to be the main object of the attack, hurriedly withdrew to the highest point of the mountain, where they made ready to face destruction. But the Persians, with Ephialtes and Hydarnes paid no further attention to them, but passed on along the descending track with all possible speed. The Greeks at Thermopylae had their first warning of the death that was coming with the dawn from the seer Megintius, who read their doom in the victims of sacrifice. Deserters too came in during the night with news of the Persian flank movement. And lastly, just as day was breaking, the lookout men came running from the hills. In council of war, their opinions were divided, some urging that they must not abandon their post, others the opposite. The result was that the army split, some dispersed, contingents returning to their various cities, while others made ready to stand by Leonidas. It is said that Leonidas himself dismissed them to spare their lives, but thought it unbecoming for the Spartans under his command to desert the post which they had originally come to guard. I myself am inclined to think that he dismissed them when he realised that they had no heart for the fight and were unwilling to take their share of the danger. At the same time, honour forbade that he himself should go, and indeed by remaining at his post he left great glory behind him, and Sparta did not lose her prosperity, as might otherwise have happened. For right at the onset of the war the Spartans had been told by the Delphic oracle that either the city must be laid waste by the foreigner, or a Spartan king be killed. The prophecy was a hexameter verse, and ran as follows. Hear your fate, O dwellers in Sparta of the wide spaces. Either your famed great town must be sacked by Perseus' sons, or, if that not be, the whole land of Lacedaemon shall mourn the death of a king of the house of Heracles, for not the strength of lions or of bulls shall hold him. Strength against strength, for he has the power of Zeus, and will not be checked till one of these two he has consumed. I believe it was the thought of this oracle, combined with his wish to lay up for the Spartans a treasure of fame, in which no other city should share, that made Leonidas dismiss those troops. I do not think that they deserted or went off without order because of a difference of opinion. Moreover, I am strongly supported in this view by the case of the seer Megintius, who was with the army, an Achaemenian said to be of the clan of Melaphus, who foretold the coming doom from his inspection of the sacrificial victims. He quite plainly received orders from Leonidas to quit Thermopylae, to save him from sharing the army's fate. He refused to go, but he sent his only son, who was serving with the forces. Thus it was that the Confederate troops by Leonidas' orders abandoned their post and left the pass, all except the Thespians and the Thebans who remained with the Spartans. The Thebans were detained by Leonidas as hostages, very much against their will, but the Thespians of their own accord refused to desert Leonidas and his men, and stayed and died with them. They were under the command of Demiphalus, the son of Diarmades. In the morning Xerxes poured a libation to the rising sun, and then waited until the time when the marketplaces filled before he began to move forward. This was according to Ephialtes' instructions, for the way down the ridge is much shorter and more direct than the long and circuitous ascent. As the Persian army advanced to the assault, the Greeks under Leonidas, knowing that they were going to their deaths, went out into the wider parts of the pass, much further than they had done before in the previous day's fighting, when they had been holding the wall and making sorties from behind it into the narrow neck. but now they fought outside the narrows. Many of the Barbicans fell. Behind them the company commanders piled their whips and indiscriminately driving the men on. Many fell into the sea and were drowned, and still more were trampled to death by one another. No one could count the numbers of the dead. The Greeks, who knew that the enemy were on their way round by the mountain track and that death was inevitable, put forth all their strength and fought with fury and desperation. By this time most of their spears were broken, and they were killing Persians with their own swords. In the course of that fight Leonidas fell, having fought most gallantly, and many distinguished Spartans with him. Their names I have learned as those men who deserve to be remembered. Indeed, I have learned the names of all 300. Amongst the Persian dead too were many men of high distinction, including 2 brothers of Xerxes. There was a bitter struggle over the body of Leonidas. 4 times the Greeks drove the enemy off, and at last by their valour rescued it. So it went on until the troops with Ephialtes were close at hand, and then the Greeks knew that they had come. The character of the fighting changed. They withdrew again into the narrow neck of the pass, behind the wall, and took up a position in a single compact body, all except the Thebans, on a little hill at the entrance to the pass, where the stone lion in memory of Leonidas stands today. Here they resisted to the last, with their swords if they had them, and if not, with their hands and teeth, until the Persians, coming on from the front, over the ruins of the wall, and closing in from behind, finally overwhelmed them with missile weapons. Of all the Spartans and Thespians who fought so valiantly, the most single proof of courage was given by the Spartan Leonidas. It is said that before the battle he was told by a native of Trechis that when the Spartans shot their arrows, there were so many of them that they hid the sun. Leonidas, however, quite unmoved by the thought of the strength of the Persian army, merely remarked, "This is pleasant news that the stranger from Trechis brings us. If the Persians hide the sun, we shall have our battle in the shade." He is said to have had left on record other sayings too of similar kinds, by which he will be remembered. After Leonidas, the greatest distinction was won by 2 Spartan brothers, Alcephus and Maron, the sons of Orsiphanatus, and of the Thespians the man to gain the highest glory was a certain Diphrambus, the son of Harmates. The dead were buried where they fell, and with them the men who had been killed before those dismissed by Leonidas left the pass. Over them is this inscription, in honour of the whole force: 4,000 here from Pelops' land, against 3,000,000 once did stand. The Spartans have a special epitaph. It runs, "Go tell the Spartans, you who read, we took their orders, and here lie dead."